Welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. This is episode number 69. Thanks so much for joining me. My name is Conrad Weaver. I'm your host for the show, and I'm the director of the PTSD 911 documentary. And my goal is to bring you content that will help improve your life. So if you're a regular listener to the show, you're probably saying, boy, this sounds a little bit different than usual. And if you're watching on YouTube, you're like, you're not in your studio anymore, Conrad. You're right. I'm not in my studio. I'm in the process of moving. And so that includes moving the studio. And we didn't quite get it all set up in time to record this new episode of the podcast. So bear with me as we make a few improvements on the show, on the video and audio of the show. Today, it's a little bit different. Once we get into the meat of the show, you'll see I'm back in my regular studio for the recording. Well, my guest today is Adam Timm. He began his 20-year career in public safety as a 911 dispatcher for the LA Police Department, where he spent over a decade under the headset. He left LAPD after founding his training and consulting company to help dispatchers across the country. Adam is dedicated to empowering the current and future leaders of 911. He is the author of 3 books, including the popular Dispatcher Stress, 50 Lessons on Beating the Burnout, and his most recent, People-Driven Leadership, How the Best 911 Centers Inspire Positive Change. Adam and I had a great conversation on this episode, so without further ado, here's my conversation with Adam Timm. Well, Adam, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. It's been a little while since we connected, and we've been trying to get this interview done for a long time. Welcome.
It's true. Yeah. Thanks so much. Great to be here, Conrad. And I'm excited for our conversation. You've been doing such amazing work with the documentary. And we first started talking like literally years ago. We were just talking about this. I'm so interested to learn about what you've learned in the last few years since you did the documentary. You've been out there talking about it, sharing with it, and you must be privy to so many conversations on this very, very important topic. So personally, I'm excited to have this conversation with you as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, awesome. Well, I want to learn a little bit about you so the audience kind of understands where you're coming from. Give us a little bit of your background, kind of the cliff notes of that.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So this is my 22nd year in 911 and public safety. I've only ever worked in 911. I started, because it was early 2000s, for Los Angeles Police Department Communications Division. So I was a 911 dispatcher for LAPD, and the job classification is Police Service Representative. So I was a police Service Representative, or PSR for short, for LAPD Communications Division. And I did the job under the headset for 10 and a half years. I didn't know it at the time, but LAPD Communications Division is one of the largest 911 centers in the world. And we process 3 million calls for service each year. I was one of 650 line level dispatchers. So there was lots of us there. And I also didn't know that I would struggle with burnout and that I was ill-equipped to handle the rigors of the job from a mental, emotional, and psychological perspective. And for the first 7 years of my 10 years under the headset, I was not a very good employee. I have a discipline record to show for it. I almost got fired because of citizen complaints on the non-emergency line. And it wasn't until I got my 3rd complaint and I had to serve suspension days that I realized that I had to change my ways. And so I found resilience and stress reduction tools as a result of that epiphany. And that kind of started my trajectory of what I'm now on. That was like 15 years ago.
In your training, was there any kind of talk about mental health and how the job affects you? Anything like that?
No. It was very much, this is the job. Here's incident types, detail types. Here's the system of prioritization. Here's how do you capture the interview information from the caller and create a call for service and enter it into the CAD and dispatch it for the responding units. If you're working the radio, if an officer says this, here's what you say in response. So it was all very technical. And one thing I've learned, so I left the center to do this full time, which is training and speaking. I have my company is called the Healthy Dispatcher. We do training classes and consulting services. When I left LAPD, I found out that large agencies, LAP is one of these large agencies, do training very well, meaning the training program is much longer than at smaller agencies. It's much more comprehensive. They give new team members much longer to qualify, to get signed off on the various aspects of the job. That being true, even in a very long training program, they didn't tell us, hey, if you're careful, the job might change you. Hey, the critical incident stress is one thing, but there's also the buildup of daily hassles and witnessing the suffering of others and the trauma associated with that. And then there's the moral injury. And not surprisingly, this is a newer body of research for public safety, focus on 911. And so it makes sense that back in 2003, when I came in, they didn't tell the full story because we didn't really have enough evidence to say this is actually what's happening. The first study that found a correlation between likely PTSD symptoms and duty-related trauma in 911 was released in 2007 by Roberta Troxel. And so in 2003, we were still like, yeah, the job it may impact us, but we can't really say that it does because that exposes us to liability. We might have to give them resources to combat those challenges. And
who's going to go work for you if you preface everything by, hey, this job's going to mess with your head, who's going to come work for you?
Exactly. So I think unfortunately now we're 22 years down the road from when I came in, but 911 as it currently is has been around, meaning the communication center as we know it, and dedicated call takers, dispatchers, as we now see, has been around since the mid 80s. So we have 40 years of experience of knowing that the job takes a toll. We're only now beginning to front load this knowledge and information to people coming into the profession.
And on a typical day for you, what was that day like?
So we are cross-trained on all functions. You do call taking and dispatching, or you don't do it. Some agencies do call taking first, and then once they feel someone's ready, they put them through the dispatch function. Some agencies keep people in call take and leave it up to the dispatcher or the operator to decide if they want to go on to dispatch. So at LAPD, we were cross-trained on all functions. So I would come in for my shift, and in roll call, which was the first 30 minutes of our shift, they would give us our shift assignments. And if you're assigned the phones, you're working the phones for the entire day. If you're working the radio, you're working the radio for the entire day. Phones, they split up into 911 and non-emergency. So on any given day, if I'm working the phones, I'm working 911, and it's call after call after call after call after call after call all day long. There's never not a call coming in when. And
how many call takers were working at one time in that agency?
We have about 50 working in the room at one center at any given day, and those are split up between call taking and dispatch, and then out in the other center. So there's one in downtown, that's central dispatch, and then there's a valley dispatch out in West Hills, if you're familiar with LA. And there's 40 working out in the valley, 50 working downtown. So anywhere from 90 to 100 operators on shift at any given time. But they're divided between phones and the radio, because we have 35 patrol divisions, and each patrol division has their own dedicated dispatcher. And then the rest are working 911 and non-emergency.
So that call volume, I'm sure in a city that size, it had to be astronomical for a day.
Yeah. So we would generate anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 incidents per day, because that information was on the screen, the little scroller board. It would say how many incidents we're up to. On a very, very busy day, I think we once got to like 10,000 incidents.
Wow.
We're looking at that. So those are incidents created in CAD. So it's not necessarily they're not all calls, but it's work generated from the field as well. But yeah, it's high volume. 3 million calls for service is the statistic. I was surprised when I started running around the country doing speaking engagements to learn that what we handled in a month, some agencies handled in a year.
Wow.
There's agencies that handle, LAPD Communications Division handles more in a week than they handle in like half a year, which actually made sense to me that I had in some way inoculated myself from the critical incident stress. And the way I thought about critical incidents also was a resilience factor for me. I thought that 911 calls and big incidents on the radio were my opportunity to help people make a difference. I had a tough time with the non-emergency stuff. And when I got that tough call, or an officer keyed the mic and needed a backup and because they're taking shots or they have a suspect proned out, I was like, oh, now it's go time. Whereas at smaller agencies where they might have one call like that a year or every 3 years, they're going to the individual is going to be likely more susceptible to vicarious trauma, post-traumatic stress, because it is so infrequent. Where for us, it's like I've handled everything at least once. Maybe twice. Like shootings on the frequency, shootings on the phone. It's just part of working in a big city. So it was really interesting.
So how did that change you? From day one, you walking into the center to the day you walked out, how did it change you?
Well, I think the changes that I wasn't aware of were growing more impatient, being more irritable, being more dismissive of other people's seemingly nonsensical matters. So the daily hassles, which are the majority of the call volume at any center, 70% of all calls placed to the 911 system are non-emergency in nature. And if I, as a values-driven individual, signed up for this job to help people and make a difference, and 70% of the time I'm dealing with like drivel from my perspective, that story I tell myself is disconnecting me from the caller and from an opportunity to authentically provide help to that person. And so that emotional distance, which is a byproduct of working with the suffering of others, emotional numbing, grew and grew and grew in that first 7 years, until I was so disconnected that I just couldn't fake it anymore. When I would answer the non-emergency line, they would tell me what they were reporting, and I would say, what do you want the police to do about it? I would be intentionally obtuse because I wanted to kind of mess with them. Of course, not making my job any easier when they can't call back and complained, and then I had to sit in the complaint review room and answer for my actions, which there's no excuse. They have the tape. I found that the tape never lied. And so I thought myself to be a kind, approachable, congenial, small town Minnesota boy. Like that was my perception of me, because I'm from small town, about town of 3,000 in the Minneapolis metro area. And one of those towns where everyone knows your name. And my mom was very socially gregarious. She even told us when we were growing up, life is about making people feel good. And that's what I was raised under. I'm the oldest of 5. And so I come into this job and I'm Adam, the Minnesota boy, and hey, I'm very nice. But what I didn't know is that my perception of me was very different. And this fell outside of my realm of awareness. Other people's perception of me was very different, both on the phones, as evidenced by the complaints, and by my coworkers. I learned, so at that 7-year mark, that's when the illustration was so stark. You're going to lose your job if you don't change your approach. And I had to like find out where this perception was coming from. And I took a mindfulness-based stress reduction class, and I learned how far the gap was between how I thought of me and how others thought of me. And it started to make sense. And within 6 months of using mindfulness and journaling, increasing my self-awareness, and then using that information about myself to make real changes, take real action, I became different. My life had transformed, and I continued to work at the job for another 3 years or so, in this different way. And it was sometime in the last 3 years that one of my coworkers came up to me and she said, "Adam, I don't know what you did. You're so much easier to be around. Back then, we were calling you Angry Adam behind your back." So to answer your question, it's a long answer. I did not come into the profession an angry, bitter, impatient person. The profession, I probably had those nascent underpinnings that I didn't know were there, but they were amplified by being subjected to the travails of a unconscious population, which then became my job and responsibility. Because you might be thinking, yeah, you were paid to do that. Yeah. Whatever. I still didn't want to deal with it. And so I fortunately got an opportunity to redeem myself and show to my coworkers that I wasn't the angry person that they began to know me as. And I'm grateful for that my legacy at LAPD Communications Division is something different than it could have been if I had just left or gotten fired. I mean, geez.
Right. Yeah. We know a lot of first responders have really high ACEs scores, and that doesn't sound like that was you. Would you agree with that?
Tell me more about what you're referring to.
So the ACEs score is the average childhood experiences score on a scale of 1 to 10. And the average first responder, law enforcement, fire, I'm not sure what it is for 911, but the average first responder is in a 6 or 7 range, which is really high. Where there's a list of like 10 different things that people can have experienced in childhood, whether it's divorce or violence or drug use or, parents in prison, things like that. It doesn't sound like that was your childhood. You came up in a fairly solid way, right? Am I right about that? Or
but I would say that I'm the oldest of 5. My parents were very young when they had me. Dad was 21, mom was 19. So they were kids raising kids. And then they had 4 more kids within 10 years. So by the time they were 30, they had 5 kids. It was an acrimonious relationship. They never matured beyond that kind of high school version of themselves, but then they're also raising kids and the stress related to that. So I was pushed very hard. I was punished severely. And so that was what propelled me into the future. It was like, you got to perform, you got to be the best. You're the oldest. And then my parents fought a lot. So my model of relationship was not the most conducive to success in my own personal life. So I think that while I had both parents, I had a small town Minnesota upbringing where we played in the yard and it was long summers and going to church camp. There were still lessons and strain associated with my upbringing. And I think that part of and I learned this in the stress reduction class that I took at the 7-year mark, part of my angst and disconnection from people was caused by blame on myself, like in not giving myself the acknowledgement of doing the best that I can, feeling like I was never good enough because my my childlike brain learned in those formative years that no matter what I do, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of love. And so I think that stopping that cycle of I'm not worthy was part of my self-discovery. And that wasn't until age 30 that I was like, oh, well, actually, my parents did the very best they knew how to at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
they subjected me to challenges, but it wasn't intentional. It wasn't because I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't worthy of love. It was that they just were parenting the way that their parents parented them. And
Right.
I think there was some ownership that came with that. And
Mm-hmm.
I became better able to be aware and take responsibility for my actions, as opposed to saying, hey, and I spent those first 7 years blaming everybody else, like the callers for being so stupid, my supervisors for gunning for me, my coworkers being so lazy, blame, deflection. Nothing landed until I was like, oh, I'm the common denominator in all of these instances. So I do think that I would like to take the ACEs, because I would imagine that my early childhood experiences provided the fertile ground for my angst and impatience, because it was directed at me, I thought, from my parents. So I'm directing it at myself, and now I'm directing it at the world, like any good parent would.
Yeah, right. I can, once we're offline here, I can share a link with you where you can go on this
Please.
website and you can take it's really a quick, 10 question thing that you fill out. So it's pretty revealing about, oneself, in that. But do you think that your story is, or let me ask you this, and your travels across the country now over the past number of years, have you seen yourself in other people that you've encountered, other 911
Yeah.
folks?
Yeah. And even more important to me is people see themselves in my story. And so I
Mm-hmm.
tell the story of Angry Adam, and I, at the 911 conferences or in a training class, I see people go, I'm that person. And I've had people write me, they'll send me an email to say, hey, I'm Angry Mary at work, and I don't want to be this way. I think, thank you so much for telling your story and giving us tools to change things. So yeah, I see people, people come up to me and literally say that. So I don't have to wonder. I think that's one of the things that fuels me. I travel a lot for work. I travel 200 days or more a year. And when I hear this reflection, I'm like, oh, that's why I got to keep doing this, because my story is not unique. We're all grappling with similar challenges, and there's something heartening in knowing that the solutions are also universally applicable if we're experiencing similar challenges.
Mm-hmm. So, what was the transition for you out of 911 as a frontline operator to doing what you do now? What caused you to say, "Hey, I think I want to help others"?
Well, that class that I took, the 6-week stress reduction class, I was so impressed by how things changed and how quickly things began to change in my life. Just in that first 6 weeks, I was like, oh my! I was coming online. My self awareness was coming online for, it felt like, the first time. And after the 6-week class, I had these tools and I continued to practice them. I couldn't go back to the old way, so I continued to practice them for 6 more months, and that's when the real habits. The new habits began to form and be the new way, or the norm, as opposed to just something I was trying on. And so impressed by the way these simple practices, like sitting still and breathing, writing in a journal, tracking my thoughts and emotions during any given time. So impressed by how these simple tools changed me. I wrote a proposal to my leadership, and it was to teach a weekly stress reduction session at the dispatch center. And I hand wrote this note on an LAPD form, and I submitted to my watch commander at the time, who was a lieutenant with like 25 years on, who was doing his kind of retirement stint in communications division before he was done with the LAPD, Lieutenant Dennis. And he read that proposal in front of me, and he said, I've seen the changes. I'll support this. Make sure you get the captain's approval. So I went to the captain, Captain Joel Justice. I said, Captain Justice, I want to do this thing. He said, I'll support anything that makes life easier around here. Want to start next week? And from that initial session, where 40 of my coworkers came to that first session,
Wow.
it ended up being like a 15-minute guided mindfulness session for my fellow coworkers. That program ran for 18 months, weekly sessions for 18 months at the dispatch center. So that was like my first program, as it were. But most importantly, it became the most clearest indication of a way that I could give authentically in a way that really meant something to me, and I could see the ripple effects going out into the world. Yes, I was good at working the phones after I had changed things. I was good at working the radio, but what I always wanted was to help people and make a difference in a way that was uniquely mine. And so this program kind of became that, and it rolled into other things. And I was able to go through an instructor development course to learn how to build curriculum and build training classes while working at the LAPD. I started learning how to be a public speaker. I was going to Toastmasters. I wrote my first book during that time as well, which was called Stress is Optional: How to Kick the Habit. And it all came from this kernel of things are different now, and these are the tools that changed my life. I wonder if others could benefit from them. And so I just kind of followed that path that began to rise to meet my feet. And after 3 years or so of pulling together these seemingly disparate threads, I was ready. I was ready to pursue something that was uniquely mine. And that's when I decided. So after 10 and a half years, I decided that I was going to leave dispatch and start a training company and teach others these tools on my own, the tools that I had been teaching under the safety of my 9-to-5 job.
So looking back at when you were teaching those things over that 18 months or so, what did you do on a daily practice to keep you in a healthy, good spot so that you could teach these things effectively?
Yeah, I continued to grow my understanding of the tools. I was continuing to work with a teacher, learning the lessons. So the act of mindfulness is it's the practice that creates results. But if we don't have the viewpoint of how to incorporate those results into our worldview, then we may simply be going through the motions. And so I continued my study of the practice of mindfulness and what was truly happening at a fundamental level. And I continued to connect every single day. Before I would go to work, I would sit for 20 or 30 minutes on my mindfulness or my meditation seat. And I would continue to write in my journal, unearthing these understandings of how situations would impact me, how it would provoke certain emotions, which would then cause me to behave in certain ways. And so I continued to pull at the thread, even though I was now, I guess, a teacher. I saw myself more as an example of what's possible when you just begin. And I think the biggest challenge I experienced very early on was even considering that I could show others these tools. Like, who am I? Even my first book, it's a short book, but it took me a year to write it while working with a writing coach, because I would sit there and I had an assignment of how many words I had to write during this particular week. And I would sit there and nothing would come out, because all I would do was sit there and doubt myself. Like, who am I to tell this story? The story has been, I'm not a doctor. I'm not an MD. I'm not anything. And then I would come back to it. These tools changed my life. So that is enough. My experience is enough. So on a daily basis, I would have to remind myself of that. And I would have to continue to do the practice, because I could not show up in those sessions for those in that 18 months and tell people how to use these tools if I wasn't continuing to use them. That would be inauthentic. It would be do as I say, not as I do. And I think there's a realness that came with that. And also, even when I'm out in doing training classes, I've been out of the center for 10 years now, but I sat under the headset, I grapple with it, I struggle with it. And so people see the realness there. They're like, oh, well, he does get it. He's not just some psychologist who read a book on critical incident stress and now he's adapting it for the dispatch environment. He actually walked this road with us. And so just continuing to do the practices was the main thing that made it last for me.
That word practice, I think, sometimes gets overlooked, and as an athlete, if you're going to be a successful athlete, you have to practice the craft every day. Kobe Bryant was one of those examples that would get up at 4 a.m. or something and be in the gym shooting hoops.
Yeah.
He was the best in the world at the time. Every
Yeah.
single day he was shooting
Yeah.
hoops. It's like, that's how you get better at something. And so having a practice, and this is something that I really struggle with on a daily, is to maintain a practice of mindfulness and, gratitude and all those things. It is a practice. It is something I
Hmm.
have to practice every day in order to get better at it. I'm not going to ever get to the point where, okay, I don't have to do that anymore because now I'm a professional at this. No, I'm still
Yeah.
going to practice that thing to keep me healthy, to keep me well. And that's something that, I was just thinking as you were talking that, yeah, I need to get better at that. I need to get better at journaling. I started journaling, in the early of this year, the first few days, and I probably hit that. I think it's Quitter's Day, they say, January 10th, and I
Yeah.
just quit the practice of journaling. And so I need to jump back on that. So you've inspired me to do that. What do you do now to maintain your mental health and wellness?
A great question. I am pretty religious about working out every week. I think in order to sustain the life that I live, which is sitting on lots of planes and living out of my suitcase in hotels, is to get on the treadmill, or I do at least one long run when I'm back here in LA every week, and also connecting with my mindfulness practice, being still, continuing to read books on self improvement and personal development. So just staying on the path for me is very important. I do think that the exercise, I like to run, and I listen to drum and bass. If you're not familiar with it, it's very
Mm.
fast paced music, but it hits on my tempo of the cadence of my run, and that gets me into that mindfulness state, that zone. And if I don't do that, so if I get overly busy, I notice the difference in my headspace. I notice the difference in the way that I feel, and so I think that it's important. It's like, I think many people think that it's an all or nothing thing.
Mm.
Like you have to do all of these things or you're not healthy.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it's really about finding something that gets you going. That's something that's all about you. Every one of us needs something that is very selfish.
Mm.
It's not selfish. It's very much for ourselves. And for me, it's running 5 miles, listening to drum and bass music really loud in my
Mm.
headphones, and I'm bouncing along. I'm excited. I'm happy. It gets me in that emotional state. As long as I can connect with that state a few times a week, I find that the quality of my attention and the version of me that shows up when I'm doing my work, which is teaching for 8 hours with a room of 20 to 50 to 100, or at conferences, I'm doing 1 hour breakout sessions for 300 people. Like I have to hold space for this room, and I have to be able to
Mhm.
work with this room. If I'm not doing things that allow me to be a conduit for the energy that I want to put into the room, then I'm doing not only myself a disservice, because I love my
Mhm.
job and I'm passionate about it. I'm also doing a disservice to others who are there to receive something, and they may not know
Mhm.
what they're there to receive, but
Mhm.
they'll know it when they find it. I'm preventing
It's the
that
same.
connection from happening.
It's the concept of going to a restaurant and a waiter gives you a cup and it's empty. You wouldn't consider that, right? You can't
Yeah, what
serve
a
out
great
of an empty
metaphor.
cup, right? You
Yes,
have to serve,
absolutely.
and really you have to serve out of the overflow. You have to give
Right,
out of the overflow. So you need to input
right.
enough so that it's overflowing, that you have something to give, right? And I think that's something
Exactly.
that that many of us need to really work on, is to keep that cup full. I mean, in a healthy way. We also use the cup as a metaphor for something bad, but use it
Yeah,
as a metaphor for something good. Keep it full in a healthy way so that you have more to give when it's needed. Yeah.
absolutely.
Um, so I was looking at your website, and you call yourself the Healthy Dispatcher. That's the name of the website. So, what is a healthy
Yeah.
dispatcher?
So my company is called the Healthy Dispatcher. I never
Yeah.
intended to call myself the Healthy Dispatcher. I just
Sure.
want to qualify that because sometimes people will. So I'll do a keynote, and they will. I provide my bio, and as they're introducing me, they'll say, "Adam Timm, the Healthy Dispatcher," and I'm trying to divest my name
You
from
come
the
up and say,
brand
"Hey,
name because
I'm actually the angry dispatcher."
well, I mean, also I want people to see that Chris Inman, my other instructor, he is also of the Healthy Dispatcher, from the Healthy
Mhm.
Dispatcher. But I think that what your question offers is a great understanding of what health really means. So from my perspective, the Healthy Dispatcher is someone who is experiencing wellness. So it's not about physical health, it's mental, emotional, spiritual, physical health. And in the work that I get to do with 911 centers across the country, it also includes organizational health because there's an organizational component to being happy and healthy in the workplace. And if we have a center that the culture is toxic and negative, and we're not working to correct that environment that creates ill health or dis-ease, then how can we expect our team members to be healthy, which I believe that we, as managers or directors of centers, we owe it to our people to create an environment where health can exist. And so it's the totality of health that we're working to help with. So I have an 8-hour stress resilience class, and in that class we talk about health being the mindfulness practice and journaling and self-awareness. And then, do you eat the right thing? Do you exercise? Do you spend time with people who lift you up? Do you are you able to insulate yourself from the negative nature of much of the content of the work that we do? So that's individual health from that perspective. And then I have a class on communication and conflict resolution. Are you a healthy communicator? Are you able to build healthy relationships with your fellow coworkers? When you go home, are you engaged with your family and friends? So as a buffer, as a resilience factor to the rigors of the job. So to me, the Healthy Dispatcher is someone who is working their life as a practice that like it's a marathon. We have a very instant gratification culture. We're so invested in quick fixes. I mean, that's what our smartphones and social media is designed to hijack the dopamine reward system, right? And so we think that if we reach for something that will make us feel good in the moment, like that's going to be the marathon fix, and it often isn't. It doesn't take very long to talk with someone who works in public safety to hear what their magic number is, which is the minutes and hours left to retirement. And I always ask, you know when you're going to retire and you're going to start getting that good paying pension. Are you living today in a way that will ensure your health and happiness once you get there and beyond? Because if we're lucky, we still have 20 more years left after we hit our retirement number. That's a whole new ball of wax. That's a
And
new
in the first
phase.
responder world, that's not guaranteed. I mean, that number's
Most
drastically
often.
reduced.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so I think from my perspective, health is not just what you eat. It's not just about exercise. It's not just whether you go to the doctor for your regular checkups. It's everything. Do you have a global viewpoint on what it means for the individual to be healthy? And then if it is your job as a leader to ensure that you have a team that can be healthy, are you creating environments where that's possible? Is the other part of it.
Mhm. So you have a book that's called People Driven Leadership. What
I do.
is that? What is a people driven leadership? What's that look like?
Well, the complete title of the book is "People Driven Leadership: How the Best 911 Centers Inspire Positive Change," and I released that book in 2020 after doing 3 or 4 years of research. As I was running around the country doing training classes and conference sessions at the 911 conferences, I would hear interesting things from people, and they would say, "Gosh, I love my team members. I love the place that I work at. and we're doing such great things, and I feel complete doing this work at this center. And I would invite those people into conversations to learn what they're doing differently, because the vast majority of centers, there's 5,000 or 5,600 or so 911 centers in this country. Vast majority of centers are very difficult places to work where you don't hear those things. You hear something different. And so I would invite these people into conversation, and they would tell me about their leadership, and they would tell me how engaged they felt, and they would tell me how they feel seen, heard, and recognized as individuals when they come into work. And I would get their leaders on the line, and I would, after doing 3 to 4 years of pulling together all of these stories with managers and directors and supervisors from these great centers that have very little turnover, that have a real sense of team, I found that there are consistent themes between all of these centers, and I call them people-driven centers. And it starts with leadership. So people-driven leaders are leaders who understand what it takes to make the human capital in their organization feel like coming into work. That's one of the things that I found really interesting as I was doing the research for the book, that people who feel like coming into work are more likely to come into work. Isn't that mind-blowing? Wow. And the agencies, right? And the agencies that cultivate that type of feeling have less problems with turnover and have less problems with toxicity and negativity caused by the job, as well as mandatory overtime and everything else that are the way things are in our profession. And so I was inspired to tell these stories. It's basically a collection of stories, and the book is arranged in a way so that the reader can begin to practice these tools in their own work life and their own life. I mean, there's transference to life outside of work as well. But more importantly, it's an organizational change guidebook, because I find that most want to do well. Most who work in this profession want to do right by their people. If you're in a leadership role, you don't intentionally sabotage work life for your team members, but we don't always know where to apply pressure or to devote our time, attention, and resources, because it's busy. Like, we're scrambling around most days. Like, okay, so where to create a people-driven center, what do I do? And it's designed as a step-by-step based on the examples set by the great leaders in the 911 industry.
And we know from the FOP's their annual surveys that they put out, one of the top stressors for law enforcement specifically is organizational stress.
Exactly.
And so if that's one of your top stressors, then it really should behoove you to, okay, let's focus on that. Let's work on that. Let's improve that. And I have just a personal anecdote where that was an amazing transformation. And at my wife's school, she was an assistant principal last year at the school. This year she's in charge. She's the principal.
Wow.
And the culture of that school was dead. It was trashed. I mean, people were just wanting to jump ship. It was just a horrible, horrible culture. And within 4 months, she has transformed that place into what she calls a school that we love. And the teachers love it. The teachers love coming to work. The students love coming to work. The parents are excited. And it was all from a leadership perspective, just some tweaks that she made, and some of them big tweaks, said, this is how we're going to do things. And it made all the difference. And
That's
now
amazing.
She has the support of probably 99% of her staff. And it's absolutely
in just 4 months.
Amazing. Yeah, in 4 months.
Well, and it sounds like she probably shouldn't discount the work she was doing as assistant. She would probably lay this foundation. So
she did
4 months where she can really make changes because she's the one in charge. But before that, she was preparing to do the amazing work she's doing right now.
Absolutely.
That's great.
So it can be done.
Story.
So why do you think so many, if there's 5,000 911 centers across the country, why are so many in a bad place when it comes to organizational health?
I think that it stems from the way that it's always been arranged. So most 911 centers have been embedded within a police agency, embedded within a fire service agency, and ultimate decision-making power has historically been the chief of police or the fire chief or someone in a position who's removed from the actual operation of the 911 center. And that, what I've found, it sets up a difficult situation, because a police chief, while even if they are people driven and they really care about making a positive impact, if they've spent the last 20, 30 years in patrol, running around in a police car, thinking about crime and statistics and community safety from their patrol-centric perspective, what qualifications do they have for effectively running or managing a 911 center? Zero, except that they know that dispatch works because they're on the radio and they help keep us safe. The best centers all along this line are actually run by people who came out of the dispatch seat. In fact, one of my friends, Melissa Alterio, who's the executive director at Cobb County 911 out in Marietta, Georgia, which is in the Atlanta metro area, she's been in 911 for almost 40 years. She started as a baby dispatcher, and for the last 10 years or so, she's been an executive director at a couple of different centers, and her career is really culminating right now at Cobb County, where she has made a 160-person center fully staffed and a clearly defined team of values-driven, people-driven professionals. It's amazing. And most people-driven leaders are very humble. She will not take responsibility for it, because she's like, oh, you should talk to my managers. They're doing a really good job. Oh, you got to talk to my supervisors. Oh, you got to talk to the line levels, people who are coming in. They just get it. And I believe that as long as 911 and the communication center is seen as some ancillary service that kind of runs itself, we will continue to see the majority of centers as difficult places to work, because it takes very active and engaged leadership to turn around a culture that's been perpetually negative. So if your culture has been negative for 20 years, the stories that perpetuate the culture are so firmly entrenched. Your organization's culture is not its culture unless you've taken it for granted. People don't even know that they are indoctrinated into their culture until a new person comes in and goes, oh my gosh, I can't work here. And then they quit within the first 6 to 12 months. They are not yet indoctrinated, but they know they can't hack it. And the people who are part of the culture will say, see, that younger generation, they just don't want to work.
Not realizing that they're part of the problem.
That they are the problem. Yeah, exactly. So I'm hopeful.
So how does someone who's sitting at the console under the headset, and they see this and they want to affect change, what do they do if they're not one of the leaders?
That's a great question. First of all, don't give up hope, because your impact, whether you regard it as making a big difference or not, actually does make a difference. And we should not discount or undervalue the importance of me being a positive, kind, and compassionate person, no matter where I am in the organization. So if I work hard, and it's not easy, it's never easy for the folks that do decide each and every day to show up as the best version of themselves that they'd like to put forward. It's not easy to do that, to make that decision and come in and do a great job where you're employing empathy and kindness and compassion, both to your fellow coworkers alongside you and to every single caller, and to be attentive and kind to the responders out in the field that we serve. But we can't discount how important that is. What ripple effects would you want to intentionally choose to make if you felt you had a choice? And you might read into that question and say, oh my gosh, I do have a choice, because when that phone rings, I am the person helping that one person. And while I might not think that their question or their request for help meets my criteria for a need that I would ask for, that's not the question. The question is, Can I help them? And the answer is almost always yes. There is something that I can do to help this person, even if it is just to reassure them that we have the call and police will be out there as soon as possible. So wherever you are, just know that you do make a difference. And I was just a very quick story. I was most impacted by this understanding based on the example that one of my coworkers at LAPD set for me. And she modeled this every day. She retired recently after 37 years in the profession. And she did not promote to supervisor, which at large agency is a huge temptation, because most large agencies, the supervisor job classification is so busy that you don't have to work the floor anymore. It's not a requirement. But Tony is her name. She did her entire time on the floor, all 37 years. And she also did her entire 37 years with a sunshiny, sugary, sweet disposition with every single non-emergency caller. And it just drove me crazy when I was angry at him, because I was like, she's making me look bad. Also, she's teaching callers that they can call in and get kind and courteous response. Why would we want to teach callers to call us back like that? Because I thought my job was to punish people for calling in. Guess who was getting more of what they wanted out of their life? She was. And when I couldn't afford any more strikes against me, I needed to find people like Tony to emulate. And I asked Tony, I said, "Hi, how do you do this?" She's like, "What, be nice?" Yeah. How do you consistently show up as the best version of yourself? And she said, "Well, first of all, I got in this profession to help people and make a difference. And I know that I do that every single day. And I don't judge how much assistance I provide. I just do it and I move on to the next transaction. And I know that I'm making a difference. Also, my relationship with my husband," and she had been married 50 years when she recounted this story to me. She said, "My relationship with my husband is more important to me than going home with a big old chip on my shoulder. And I take my role very seriously as a wife, as a partner, and as someone who helps here on the job." And I think that we sometimes get disconnected from how good we are at actually compartmentalizing things. I know many hardened public safety professionals think like, "Hey, I'm good at work. The job doesn't get to me. I bring my best self to work every single day." But then they go home and they're completely checked out. Mm-hmm. They are no longer engaging the hobbies or interests that once filled their cup. They are a very different version of themselves they used to be. And their family and friends mention it. They're like, "Gosh, are you okay?" And if you think that you can be crappy to callers all day, every day for months and years, and you are also a great partner or parent or friend, or you're actually truly enjoying life outside of work, okay, you might be an outlier, but for me, it was all over. Like, I was taking out my rage and frustration, both on callers and then fellow drivers. I was a hardcore road rager. I was in a toxic relationship. I drank too much. I enjoyed life too little. I didn't realize that my entire life system was blinking warning signs. And I think that we can take a page out of Tony's book and be much more mindful of how we work the various dimensions of our life, because even if you're a very good compartmentalizer, there is a bleed over effect that we're not always aware of.
So if someone's listening to this and they saw themselves in what you just described, yeah, I'm that person. What's the first step that they should do to get to the place where they really want to go?
My mind went to the first step, this can be difficult to take, but it's profound. It's asking for help. It's finding resources. So I didn't ask for help from a mental health professional. I eventually did go to the EAP. I eventually went into therapy. But my initial asking for help was accessing this stress reduction program, this 6-week class. So I signed up and paid a few $100s for a class. And that barrier to entry for me was enough to ensure that I was going to get my money's worth, So I think ask for help and invest in at a level that will cause you to want to engage whatever resource that you have accessed in a meaningful way, so that you can derive the benefits from that assistance or that help. So find a resource, step outside of yourself, and see what happens. I think I continue to pull that thread, and it opened to this life, and honestly, that I'm still living. If I hadn't initially, first of all, been a product of formal discipline, and second of all, like taken that as a real wake up sign and gotten help, I wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with you and living the wonderful life that I feel so fortunate to live. And it started with, I need help. I don't know what's up with me. I can't do it alone because I keep doing the same thing, expecting a different result. Mm-hmm. And amazingly, the same actions are insanity. Insanity. Yeah, exactly. So I was hesitant to say that, even as like, what's the first step? Because it's so scary to say, I don't know. As a type A perfectionist, most of us are in public safety, to say, shoot, I can't do it alone. It's very scary to do that.
So talk to that leader who's in that agency that perhaps they're wanting to affect change, but perhaps they're even seeing some resistance from the people above them. How can they affect change?
Well, first of all, if you are coming in each day, making a positive impact to the people around you, to the people who look up to you, and you know that you're making a positive impact because you're getting that feedback, you've cultivated the relationships that make work less like work. There is a sense of team camaraderie. Keep doing that. Even if it isn't noticed from the powers that be, those on high, it does make a difference to every single person that you interact with on a daily basis, not only to them, but also to the people in their lives. There's these ripple effects, and every great leader is causing these positive ripple effects every single day. It can be said in no other way. Also, don't give up hope that it can change. I often share that all of the organizational change, the culture change initiatives that I chronicle in the leadership book, they've taken 1.5 to 2 years to develop the need for change, start changing what needs to change, and then slowly, methodically getting everybody aligned with and harmonized with what needs to change. We're very distracted, and we expect, like, I've been at it for 3 weeks. What do you mean it's going to take 18 months?
And it's like working out or losing weight. I've been doing this exercise for a month and I still haven't seen.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, when are this 20 pounds going to drop off? And I think that, and I know that there's leaders who are listening. They're saying, well, I've been doing it for 5 years and it's still not amounting to anything. And it's important to tell the full story to the people who notice it's amounting to a lot. If you are a frontline supervisor, you are the buffer zone that is creating at least the potential or the possibility that the people under your charge have the potential to experience a healthy organization. Even if you're getting it from on top, even if the director or manager is disengaged, they're on 30 years on countdown watch for retirement, and they have the power and ability to change things, and they're not using their powers for good. If you are using your position and power for good each and every day, it is making a difference. It is. And I often hear this from people who read the leadership book, who are in that position. where they're sandwiched between the complaints of the floor and the complaints from on top. And they're like, gosh, I feel like nothing I do is good enough.
Mm-hmm.
But when I read the book, it was heartening to know that I'm doing the right thing. It was a reminder that this battle is worth waging. And that's the message for that leader. Just keep fighting the good fight. Because the other side of it, the other choice you have, and it would be a choice, is to slip into burnout and disengagement and to be one of the leaders that you don't want to be, or one of the managers you don't want to be. And if the choice is that stark, I either get to continue to make a positive impact in the people who look up to me, or I'll slide down that dark path of burnout and disengagement. I find that most leaders who are fighting the good fight will re-engage. They'll be like, gosh, I'm not going to go that way because I've seen others succumb to that darkness. And that might mean retiring. Like, there are people who are fighting the good fight. They're at 35 years. They don't know what else they're going to do in their personal lives. And so they're just like keep cashing those checks, putting into their pension. If you've lost the spark, no problem. Thank you for your service. It's time for the next chapter. And there's nothing wrong with that either. That's not failure. That's not defeatist. That's just, there is a season for everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been an enlightening and encouraging conversation. I really appreciate the insights that you've brought. So how can people get in touch with you? How can they learn more about what you guys do?
Well, the website you've been perusing is thehealthydispatcher.com. And we're very active on all the social feeds. We share daily on X and Facebook, our business page, The Healthy Dispatcher, Instagram, my social team, Sophia and Megan, they're amazing. We are at all of the national 911 conferences. If you are an IED shop, you use priority dispatch protocols. We will be very prevalent at Navigator this year in Orlando. I'm actually doing the closing keynote for the conference. And if I can answer any specific and direct questions from any of your listeners, I'm very available. I'm a resource in this whole thing. I'm very passionate about what I do and empowering others. So send me an email. I'm adam@thehealthydispatcher.com. You see it here on the shirt, just like that. But Conrad, this has been a wonderful conversation for me. I had a lot of fun, and we didn't get to my questions about you, but I understand you are the host.
Yeah, we'll save that for another day, and you can
Deal.
fire away. But I want to give you the last word. So, talk to those dispatchers out there, those people who are listening, even perhaps those non-dispatchers who rely on dispatch to do their job. What can you say to them?
I think it's important for everyone who works in dispatch to see themselves as the first responders. And we're not out in the field witnessing what's out there, but we're very much at the table. We are working the incidents, and we are subject to the same challenges with vicarious trauma and witnessing the suffering of others and post-traumatic stress. And that's okay. It is okay to not be okay. Just don't stay there. Ask for help. Encourage the people around you to ask for help. And we literally can do this together. And it can feel isolationist because that's how chronic stress impacts us. We think we're the only ones, but you're not. We're all in this together. And it's a brotherhood, a sisterhood. It's a team. And the more we rely on each other, the more likely it is that we will thrive for the long term.
Awesome. We'll leave it at that. Hey, thanks so much for listening today. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you following along to what we're doing here on the podcast. If you are a regular listener, please be sure to subscribe. And I would love it if you would leave me a review. That would really help. It would mean a lot to me to know and understand what you're looking for, what you like, what you don't like for the show. And please share. That helps us spread the word and helps us be able to help more people. So if you can do that, that would be awesome. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for listening. And please remember, you are not alone. If you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself, and take care of those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.